It is still smack in the middle of a very interesting discussion. So I'm going to start with a short background, of course, maybe more for the online community than the in-person, because everyone here knows it, but it helps me too, right? So our Mishnah, which we're today's daf is daf Mem Tet 49 in Masechet Gittin, and we are on 48b, Mem Chet Amabet, as you said, 8 lines from the bottom. But the Mishnah, which was the top of the Amud, talked about a person who has to make payments, right? So in those days, things were a lot more complicated for many reasons. Everything was more complicated in olden times and also simpler. But the more complicated part was that they didn't, I would say, use cash as much, right? They didn't have necessarily the concept of interchangeable cash. They did, but it wasn't the same legal currency. But they used things of value. And obviously the thing of value for most people in agrarian society was land, right? The benefit of land, of course, is that unlike animals, it's very hard to get rid of your land and hide it. So land was used to pay debts and to pay, damages, which we're going to talk about. And as we've discussed many times, when a person lent someone else money, the land became owed for that money. And so that if the owner, let's say Reuven borrowed $100 from Shimon, if Reuven then went and sold that property, whoever they sold it to assumes the responsibility to pay back that land to Shimon if Reuven doesn't, right? And so, of course, we do it today, right? When you buy land, you have to do a title check and all that stuff, and just make sure it's not already owed to somebody else, right? And it's not clear that they really had very good written systems for this back in the day. There were no good computer databases, but they had a huge word of mouth, right? So as long as something was done in a shtar or done in front of 3 Adim, right, we have all kinds of criteria we assume everybody knows about, right? So it was pretty easy to find out if someone came and offered to sell you a building, whether that building or that land, more so than the building, was already meshubad to somebody else. So that's the first step. The Mishnah then said that if a person damages somebody else, if my animal goes, I make a fire, my animal goes into your field, say animals is a good case here, and damages your animal, I got to pay back, right? And we learned, and we're going to learn in Bava, we'll learn in all the Bavas, but Bava Kama, that if it's a tam, you pay half damage. If it's a mud, you pay full damage. The pasuk says that you pay meitav sadeo or meitav karmo. You pay from the best. So we said in our Mishnah, this is the beginning of our Mishnah, nizakim, someone who does damage to somebody else and has to pay him back, you pay from the best land, idit. Again, let's say I did $100 in damage, right? You can either collect $100 in Manhattan from my land or $100 in Pittsburgh, right? So now obviously it would be more land in a place that's less desirable, but it's still less desirable. So even though it's the same value, you have to give the better land, right? And of course, I use cities that are valuable, but they refer to land, which probably depends on the quality of the land and the rocks and the flatness and all those values. The Mishnah continued and said, of Balchov, you pay Benonit. If you borrow $100 from a person and then you come to pay him back and he collects and you own, 10 properties, he or she can only collect from the middle, the average one, not the best and not the worst. And a ketubav, an isha, is from the worst. It's from ziborit. It's from the lowest value. And again, the value doesn't change, right? You still have to pay the 200 or whatever you agreed to in the ketubah, but you can give it from less desirable land. So yesterday we had a machloket. So the Mishnah said that was mitei tikkun olam. And yesterday we tried to understand how this was tikkun olam, like what was exactly the Rabbanan's role in making up that this is how you should pay, right? And we quoted a machloket, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, because the Torah in Parshat Mishpatim says that if a person's animal goes into someone else's field and causes damage, you have to pay. And the Torah says, and we quote it, Meitav sadeu or Meitav karmo yishalim. You pay the best field, the best vineyard. And the question was, whose best field? The best field of the one who did the damage, the mazik, or the owner of the animal that did the damage, or the best field of the one who was damaged. And that was a funny conversation yesterday, imagining that you have two people. Reuven's cow damaged Shimon's cow. Reuven is a very wealthy guy, and he's got fields. I don't know how you talked about it yesterday, Miriam, but we'll call them, grade A and grade B and grade C or something, but which is, idit, benonit, ziborit. But you can get AA, or you can get super good. You can get all kinds of different levels within that. And let's say the one who did the damage owns incredibly valuable fields, that the one who he damaged or his animal damaged has, is a poorer person or whatever reason. He has less good fields. So the machloket was, do you go based after what's a good field for the damager or a good field for the one who was damaged? Okay, so that's where we're up to. We think we're up to. We're gonna talk about that. Well, we're 8 lines from the bottom. Well, Rabbi Yishmael, right? Rabbi Yishmael seems to say, and he does say, that you look at the best field of the one who was damaged. Ask the Gemara, the Rabbi Yishmael, Achal Shmeina, right? Rabbi Yishmael seems to say, right? It's a question actually. According to Rabbi Yishmael, if you eat something that's shamin, meaning you eat something that's good and rich, and you damage a field that's very valuable, right? Then you're saying you pay mishalim shmeina, right? You pay a good field in return. But if you're achal chusha mishalim shmeina, I don't understand if the damage was done in a this is Rabbi Shmuel's answer to Rabbi Akiva. If you damage a weak field, meaning you're doing only damage in inexpensive crops, why should you pay back with the best crops? Which is what Rabbi Akiva seems to imply, that you always pay with the best of the one who did damage. So Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, this is the case. The case, in fact, that they argue about, the question is actually, we don't know what the damage was, right? So I have a field, and some rows were growing very valuable stuff. I don't actually farm, so I don't know what's very valuable, but something that caught, it's really rich and desirable, let's say kale. And then one row has things like, iceberg lettuce, which are much less valuable. And the animal comes and eats up the field. And you don't know what was growing there, right? There's no pictures. There's no way to prove it. So maybe that's the case, right? There was valuable things in the field, less valuable things in the field. The animal came and ate aruga bin harugot, one row among the field. We don't know if the animal ate, poor, like $20 produce or $50 produce. So maybe there, what we're saying is, Mishalem leimi meitav, that there Rabbi Yishmael saying, Rabbi Akiva would be saying, right, that you pay from the best. Says the Gemara, it doesn't make any sense, because I'm a Rava, what do you mean? If you knew for a fact that this animal came and ate the junky stuff in the field, you'd only have to pay back junky stuff, right? So now you don't know what it ate. You're going to say Mishalem Shmeina, that you have to pay the rich, the more valuable things. Right? The rule everywhere is that if you come to collect from somebody, if I say you damaged me, I have to prove how much you damaged me. I can't just, right? It's not like a loan. Every time that you have to take away money from someone or values, you have to prove it. So it can't refer to that. Ela Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, and turn the page down to Naf Mem Tet. This is the case, right? Kigon, the case I started talking about earlier. Shahaita idut de nizak, sorry. The idit of the nizak, so the one who was damaged, has, two kinds of fields. Very valuable fields for him that grow quickly, and rockier fields that are less valuable. But the one who did the damage has a broader spectrum of fields and has super good fields, right? And what happens is that the idit of the nizak, the good fields of the one who was damaged, are equivalent to the bad fields of the one who did the damage, right? So they're not, the question is that when you come to pay now, do you pay the damager, do you pay in your bad fields, which are equal to the best fields of the one who was damaged, or do you pay in your best fields, which are better than the best fields of the one you damaged? So Rabbi Yishmael Savar ben Nizak Shamina. And in fact, we evaluate this based on the one who was damaged. And the one who was damaged is supposed to be made whole in his or her best fields, even if that's not the best field of the one who did the damage. And Rabbi Akiva Savar b'demazik Shamina. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, you go after the one who did the damage, and you've got to give your best fields, even if they're better than what the Nizak had ever had. My time at Rabbi Yishmael, what's Rabbi Yishmael's reasoning to say that you actually look at the one who was damaged to define what the damager pays? As Rabbi Yishmael says, it's Gzeira Shava. Nemrash Sadeh Lamata. It says Mitav Sadehu, right? So the word Sadeh appears lower down in the parsha, meaning in the discussion. And so we don't know whose field, right? It says give the best of the field. Whose field? But it says Sadeh Lamala. It says Sadeh in the beginning of the parsha when it says if an animal goes, Bi'er bas Sadeh acher, right? Your animal goes out and eats in somebody else's field. There, the field, of course, is referring to the one who was damaged, right? The animal is the object, went into the field that was damaged. So Masadeh Murad Mala is Dinizak, is referring to the field of the one who was damaged. Af Sadeh Murad Mata Dinizak. So too, when it says in the bottom part of the parsha, in 2 psukim later, pay from the best field, it means the best field of the one who was damaged. Rabbi Akiva would say, I disagree. It says in the pasuk, the same pasuk, Meitav Sadeu Yishalem. You should pay, but the one paying, of course, is the damager, right? You should pay from your best field. So that's obviously referring, Heich the Kamishalem. The one who did the damage should pay with his best field. Says Rabbi Yishmael, I agree with you. That is the way you read the pasuk. But there's also Gzera Shava. So therefore, I use both. Ahani Gzera Shava, Ahani Kra. I utilize Gzera Shava to derive halacha, and I utilize the plain reading of the pasuk. Meaning, in some ways, you go after the field of the one who was damaged, and in some ways, you go after the field of the one who did the damage. Because the Ahani Gzera Shava, the Kedam Maran. Now, Gzera Shava is like I said, that if the one who was damaged has high quality and low quality fields, but the damaged one, the nizak, his high quality fields are equivalent to the low quality fields of the damager, you only have to pay low quality fields because that equals high quality fields for the one who was damaged. But hanikra, what does the pasuk add? The itle lamazik idit v'zibori. Let's say the one who did the damage has grade A and grade C, let's say, right? That's good and bad. But the ziborit didei lo shavik idit nizik. But the one who was damaged has great fields, but his best fields only equal B, right? So the idit of the nizak, the best of the nizak, is more valuable than the worst of the mazik, but it's not quite the same, right? So then mishalem lemi meitav. Then I agree, says Rabbi Shmuel, you bump it up. Right, and you have to pay from the grade A of the damager. You can't bump it down, let's say. But had it been equal, meaning had the best field of the one who was damaged, the nizak, been equal to the worst field, the ziborit of the mazik, that would be okay for payment. So that is the way we derive it, and that's how we understand machloket Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Says the Gemara. Let's go back to the end of the Braita, right? So at the end of the Braita, Rabbi Akiva continued and said, if everyone has the page, place where like, I don't know, it's third of the way down, right? Rabbi Akiva Omer, it's a Rashi Tevot, Lo ba katuv el nikvot l'nizakin min ha'idit, right? The Torah only comes to tell you that the nizak, the one who's damaged, gets paid from the best, which everyone agrees with. V'kal v'chomer lahektish. And certainly the same would be true about hektish. Now the question is, what the heck does that mean? Kal v'chomer lahektish, right? So it's on the surface, you might say, it means that if you damage hektish, the same way if you damage your friend, you got to pay back the best. If you go to hektish owns a cow or a car, and you run over it, you got to pay back hektish with the best, right? But that's not true, right? It says in Gemara, is that referring my kavchomer la hektish? The Torah de hektish. It's referring to where the mazik's shar, Torah is the Aramaic word for a shar, right? Ox, gored the ox of hektish. That's not true. You don't have to pay when you gore the ox of hektish because the Torah says, "Chiyigach ish shar re'ehu." The person's animal gores the animal of his friend. Shar re'ehu amarachmanu. The animal of your friend, meaning your equivalent. And we learn from there below shar shel hektish. You actually don't have to pay. It's not clear what you don't have to pay, but you don't have to pay the same thing if your animal gores a shar of hektish. So it's not true that you pay hektish from the best. You don't pay at all. Ella must be la'omer. A person said, Harei alai mana lebedek habayit. Right? A person says, I'm going to give $1,000 to hektish, right? Of course, like many people make pledges, you don't fulfill your pledge, right? And they send the collection agency to come collect it. So what do they collect from? Which of your fields? So maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. That if you say I'm going to give money to hektish, right? Ati gizbar v'shako mi'idit. The gizbar comes and collects from the best. But why? Remember, if you damage someone, you pay from the best. But remember that if you borrow money from someone, right? If I borrow $1,000 from someone and say, if I don't pay you back, you can collect my field. We said in our Mishnah, we're going to discuss it more in a second, that you collect from the Beinonit, you collect from the middle level. So why should hektish get better than that, right? Doesn't matter. Lo yehei, where am I? Lo yehei ela kibachov. Why is it hektish like any other debtor, right? Any other lender. Balchov, do you know Beinanit? The Balchov should only get Beinanit. That's well, maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. That's a Kal V'chomer. The Chitem Kasav Rabbi Akiva Balchov. Sorry, the Chitem, if you say Rabbi Akiva disagrees with that, and he says, no, Balchov also gets the best, and therefore Hektish also gets the best, and it's a Kal V'chomer, right? If a regular person gets the best, certainly Hektish should get the best, right? If you borrow money, so if you owe $1,000 to another person, they can collect from the best. If you owe $1,000 to Hektish, they can collect from the best, right? Kinizakin, like a person who is damaged, doesn't matter, because you still have a question on this Kal V'chomer of a regular loan, a regular debt or responsibility to a Hektish responsibility, because Hektish is not as strong. Remember, if you damage a person, you have to pay them the best. But we just said that by Hektish, if you damage Hektish, you don't pay anything. It is weaker, meaning you don't have, Hektish does not have power to collect from you if you damage Hektish. So you're right, says Gemara. It can't be a Kal V'chomer about damage, about a responsibility, about a debt to Hektish. The Olam says the Gemara, the case is, we're 10 lines on the bottom, it's the first case where you damaged the animal of Hektish, right? So your animal walked along and rammed into the animal of Hektish, caused $1,000 of damage. And the question is, how do you pay? We said, what do you mean you pay the best? By Hektish, you don't pay anything, right? Because it says Shar Re'ehu. Rabbi Akiva doesn't agree with that. Rabbi Akiva suffered like Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. Rabbi Akiva agrees with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya in the Braita. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer, Shar shel Hektish nagach the Shar shel Hedyo. Look, if the public Shar, the Shar of Hektish, bumped into, gored a Shar of a Hedyo, they're patur, right? There's no responsibility for the government. They don't have to pay. It hasn't changed, right? But shel Hedyo, shenagach the Shar shel Hektish. But if you have a Shar of an individual that does damage to a Shar of Hektish, says Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, unlike what we just said before, Bein Tam, Bein Muad, whether the Shar of the Hedyo is a naive Shar, right? It doesn't cause a lot of damage, or it's a Muad. You mishalem nezek shalem. You pay full damage. So Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya disagrees with the halacha of Shari Eyo, implying that you don't pay at all if you damage Shar of Hektish. And he says the exact opposite. It means that Hektish doesn't pay, but you pay full price if you damage the thing that belongs to Hektish. And that's what Rabbi Akiva might have been saying. This is where if Rabbi Akiva was saying that, then I don't understand the way you read it at all, right? Yihachi, how do you know if that's the case? How do you know what we argued at the top of this page, this Amud, that the whole machloka between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel was not whether you pay the best of the damager or the best of the one who was damaged, the mazik or the nizak. But everyone agrees you pay the best of the one who did the damage. The question is, what if the best of the one who did the damage is worth more than the best of the one who was damaged, right? That's where we said it was a machloket, where the idit to nizak, the best of the one who was damaged is equal to the worst of the one who did the damage. But maybe that's not the case. Dilma the kuli ama b'dinizak shamina. Maybe, in fact, everybody agrees that you pay the best, which equals the best of the one who was damaged, meaning the nizak. So if a multi-billionaire damaged you and they have super valuable fields, we can never touch those fields. We only can get to the highest value of the one who was damaged. And maybe the machlok of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is totally separate. It's beplukta Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya pligi, Rabbanan kemifligi. Maybe they're only arguing about what happens with Hektish. Rabbi Akiva suffered like Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya that if an individual damages Hektish, they pay the best. And Rabbi Shmuel suffered like Rabbanan that if an individual damages Hektish, they don't pay the best, right? They don't pay anything. Well, if that's the machloket, then the Braita doesn't make any sense. Because remember, the words in the Braita were, Lo ba katuv, remember Rabbi Shmuel said, Rabbi Akiva, said in the Braita on Amud Aleph, right, that Rabbi Akiva Omer, Lo ba katuv ela ligvot l'nizakim min ha'idit. The Torah is coming to collect. Now you're saying it has nothing to do with that. The Torah is talking about Hektish, right? Or that's really the machloket is about Hektish. So that part doesn't make any sense, first of all. The Ode, my Kal V'chomer LaHektish. It's not a Kal V'chomer to Hektish. It's a machloket about whether Hektish pays or doesn't pay. It's not the Kal V'chomer. The Ode, and furthermore, there's an explicit Braita which talks about the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Amar Rabbi Ashi, turn the page to Amud Bet, and this will be much clearer, I hope. Tanya, the brightest behedya, Tanya behedya, we have a beferish, a braita, explicit braita that says the following. I'm reading from the top line now of Memtet Amud Bet. It says in the pasuk, Meitav sadeu umeitav karmo yishali, right? You pay off with the best field and the best vineyard. Says the Braita, Meitav sadeu shel nizak. You always look for what is the best vineyard of the one who was damaged, and then the one who pays has to give the equivalent to that. Meitav karmo shel nizak. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. So again, if the one who was damaged, his best field is what we call grade B, then if the one who did the damage has grade A and B and C and D, he only has to pay from grade B of his own fields to reimburse the one he did damage to, which is making him whole, basically, right? Giving him the best that he had. Rabbi Akiva Omer, I disagree. Meitav sadeo shel mazik. You always have to pay the best field of the one who did the damage. And so even though it's better than what this person ever owned, it doesn't matter. You damaged him. You've got to pay it. Umeitav karmo shel mazik. You go after the one who did the damage. And as we said on Amud Aleph, the machloket is not, you never obviously make the person get less than what is the best of their field. But the question is, if there's a gap between the best of the mazik and the best of the nizak, do you go up or you go down? That's the machloket, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. Ravina Amar. Now, so that's the end of Miriam's daf from yesterday. Caught up now. So remember that the Mishnah said that you always make a person who does damage pay from the best. And we abinei tikkun olam, right? Because if you do damage, we don't want to make it a high cost to you. You better watch your animals better. You better protect your property. And so we make you pay from your best field. We asked yesterday, what do you mean mipnei tikkun olam? That's the halacha midoraita. And the Torah says you got to pay the best. So the answer yesterday was, well, there's a machloket, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says you always pay the best. Rabbi Yishmael says, really, mi'ikar hadin, you only pay the best of the one who was damaged. But mipnei tikkun olam, they escalated it, and they said you got to pay even better, right? So it only made sense, our Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yishmael, not according to Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, it's not tikkun olam, it's the ikar halacha that you got to pay the best, right? Ravina has a whole nother approach. He says, I got a whole nother way to look at our Mishnah. The olam, Ravina says, Ravina amar lolam matnitin Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah could even be going according to Rabbi Akiva, who says, midoraita b'demazik shamina. That from the Torah, the halacha is that you take the best field of the one who did the damage. So what in the world does our Mishnah mean when it says you have to pay the best? Tikkun olam. That's not a tikkun olam. It's not a takana to help reduce people from being lax with their property and causing damage. It's mi'ikar haTorah that you have to do that. Says Mar, that is exactly what tikkun olam means in this case. It doesn't mean that the rabbis made it up in order to make things better. It means that the Torah said it in order to make things better. And our Mishnah is explaining the reason the Torah says you have to pay the best, according to Rabbi Akiva, is because we want you not to have your animals do damage. And that is called Darish Taima Dekra, right? We're giving a rationale for the pasuk, and we're saying the reason the Torah says this halacha is because of tikkun olam. So the halacha is not tikkun olam, meaning per se. We're not adding a halacha. We are explaining the rationale for the halacha. And let's read that inside. It's Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Shimon, the Darish Taima Dekra. It's going according to Rabbi Shimon, who was obviously one of the students, one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva later in his days, who is Darish the reasons for the pasuk. Umatam ka'amar. Our Mishnah is saying, what is the reason for the halacha that Rabbi Akiva taught us that if you do damage, you have to pay from the best? Ma'atam hanizakin shamin lahem be'idit, ibnei tikkun olam. That is so that the world will work better and people will cause less damage. The Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon. Now explicitly, we have this in a Braita. There's a little bit of debate here on the right. I don't know if you have that in your Gemaras about which Rabbi Shimon this might be, because there's different Rabbi Shimons, of course. But this Braita says Amar Rabbi Shimon, and one of them is a student of Rabbi Akiva, one is not. So I'm only said that according to one opinion here, which it says here is the Shiltot. But anyway, says the Braita Amar Rabbi Shimon. Why did the Torah tell us that if you do damage, you should pay the best, meitav sadeo, meitav karmo, because there are unscrupulous people in this world, sadly, who steal and pressure other people to give them, to give them their property. Kadesh Yomar Adam, a person should reflect and say, Lama ani gozel, lama ani chomes, right? You might otherwise think, look, I'll go steal $1,000 from that guy. If they catch me, I'll pay it back. If they don't catch me, I made off well, right? Says Rabbi Shimon, the Torah is coming to tell you, we want a gazlan to think in his head. Why should I go steal? If they catch me, not only are they going to have to pay it back, they're going to take my best land. I just bought this beautiful field. It grows the best strawberries. And all of a sudden, they're going to come and take it away from me because I stole $100 from that guy. If I steal, tomorrow Beit Din will come down to my property. They're going to take my best field. They're going to rely on what it says in the pasuk in Mishpatim, Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Karmel, Yishalem. Therefore, they said, Amru, Hanizakin Shamin Lahen Bi'idit. So that is the explanation for our Mishnah according to Rabbi Akiva. Continues the Braita, interestingly. Why did they say that if you're a Baal Chov, right, if I lend $1,000 to someone, he doesn't pay me back, and I go to collect from him, I collect from the middle of the road field. Why did they say Beinonit? Meaning, why didn't they say the best, right? Like with damages, because we're worried, right? I, see that my friend has this great property. You can see this, it happens today all the time, sadly, right? My friend has this great property. I want the property. He won't sell it to me for any amount of money in the world. It's worth, $100,000, but he won't sell it to me. Maybe he'd sell it to me for $1 million, but I don't have $1 million, right? So I come up with a great idea. I call him up. I love this case. And I say to him, my friend Ruvain, he's not really my friend. I've got a great stock tip. I got a sure fail stock, right? It can't go wrong. I heard it's going up. I'll lend you $100,000 to buy stock. You're guaranteed to double your money, right? And the guy, of course, falls for it. Not all, of course, but he falls for it. He borrows money from me. And sadly, it doesn't go that way. And now he's got to pay me back $100,000. He doesn't have the money. I'm like, well, you've got this great field that I would love to collect from. So we're worried that people are going to be unscrupulous and they're going to basically use bad loans, loans that shouldn't be made, to convince people to basically to get their hands on somebody's field, right? So, person sees that his friend's got this great field. It's beautiful location on the water and blah blah blah. He says, look, I'll go lend him $1 million. I'll go to Las Vegas, right? And I know that he's going to lose it. And I'll then collect the field for my debt. They said, slow down. You can't just always collect the best. Now, if he doesn't have anything, you can. But assuming he has other fields, you can't choose the field that you want to collect from. You only can get the middle, the equivalent field. Says, well, if that's the case, why don't you make it the worst field? Say if you lend money, you can only collect the worst quality field. That's too far because then no one's going to lend money, right? Sometimes people actually really need to borrow money. And we always have a principle, you don't want to shut the door in front of lenders, right? It'll shut the door in front of borrowers, sorry. And therefore, they made a takana that you should pay back a loan with the middle Beinonit kind of property. Continues the Braita. What about the third case in our Mishnah? What about Ktubat Isha? So if a man who dies, right, his children, his estate, have to pay his wife's Ktuba in Ziborit, in the lowest quality of the fields that he has, right? Says the Braita, Ktubat Isha b'Ziborit, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says b'Beinonit, but Rabbi Meir says that in fact that's not true, that a Ktubat Isha is paid in Beinonit, right? And that was in Machloket we had in our Mishnah as well, right? It was Tanakama. We didn't name the Tanakama, but now we know who the Tanakama is. So that's the Machloket about Rabbi Shimon. Sorry, I was at Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. I'm a Rabbi Shimon again. Why did they say that you can get away by paying a ketubah in the worst quality of fields? Because, says Rabbi Shimon, women, at least in those societies, needed to be married more than a man needed to be married, right? A man wants to get married, but a woman in that, I guess, society was, alone. She had no protector and no way to get out, and they limited her to the house, etc. And so basically she is more interested, or more, I would say, aggressive about getting married than a man necessarily. And so we have to make it a little bit easier, because otherwise he'll just not get married, right? If he says, oh, if I end up getting divorced or if I die, my estate is going to lose the best fields, he wouldn't necessarily get married. And so we want to grease the wheels, as they say, and make it a little bit more palatable for him to get married, and therefore we disadvantage the woman. Okay? Davar acher. Another reason is because isha yotza l'rtzona. A woman, she can be leave a marriage if she wants to sometimes, and shelo l'rtzona, but sometimes if she doesn't want to, meaning the husband can divorce her even against her will occasionally if he wants to. But a ish eno motzia el l'rtzono. But a husband can only leave a marriage if he wants to, meaning a wife cannot force him to divorce her. Says, what does that have to do with anything? What are you adding with this last sad detail? It says, because you might say, one second, totally unrelated, when you're talking about debts, not every marriage ends because the husband wants to end the marriage. Many marriages end because the wife wants to end the marriage, right? And so you might think that, look, if the husband wants to end the marriage, he pays a ketubah to her because he wants, it's his way of essentially ending it. Maybe if a wife asks to end the marriage, she should pay money to the husband, right? So maybe if the husband divorces his wife, so he's got to pay her a ketubah, from him. But so maybe kinafke ihi, when she initiates or wants the divorce, maybe she should have to pay. Nami litkin le'rabanan ketubah mina. Maybe there should be a ketubah that comes from her side. So therefore, tashma, that it may be true that she can initiate, meaning the desire to get divorced, but she can't force it, right? She can't make him divorce her. And therefore, isha yotza l'rtzonav shelo l'rtzona. A husband can divorce his wife even if she doesn't agree to it, but a ish eno motzia el l'rtzono, and efshar demashila b'gita. He can always not give her a get. And so even if she wants to end the marriage, she can't force it, right? And therefore, you can't say that she has to pay him when it's her desire to end the marriage, because even if it's her desire, if he doesn't agree with it, it doesn't have to happen. And so therefore, it's not entirely in her control, and you can't make her pay, obviously unrelated to our discussion about where you pay from. So that is the long and a very important braita that really explains our whole Mishnah and the reasons behind our Mishnah. Now, going back to this braita, well, it's actually going back to our Mishnah, right? So our Mishnah said, Ketubat isha b'ziborit, that when a woman comes to collect her ketubah, she gets lowest quality fields. So there's two ways, of course, that a woman collects her ketubah. Either she gets divorced, in which case her ex-husband now has to pay the ketubah, or she becomes a widow, in which case her ex-husband is dead, or her spouse, her husband is dead, right? And she collects the ketubah from his estate, or what we call miyatmi, right? From the children who are protected now in the estate, okay? Says Mar Zutra, brother of Nachman, at the two dots on Memtet Amud Bet, Lo Amran Elamiyat. When we say that a woman collects her ketubah, collects it from the lowest quality field, that's only if she's a widow and she's collecting it from orphans or the estate of the orphans. Avomine didei, and she gets divorced and she's collecting it from her husband, then bebenanit, then she gets middle of the road fields like every other debtor, right? Says the Gemara, why? Not to me. My era says Gemara, well, if that's true, what do you mean that a woman who's a widow gets her ketubah from the yatmi? My area ketubat isha, I feel call me linami. Every single debt, if a man borrows $10,000 and dies, his estate doesn't pay back that $10,000 from Beinonit like you would if he was alive, right? It's none. We learned in a Mishnah earlier, Ein nifra'in minichsei yitomim, the Mishnah, beginning of our parak, you only collect from the property of yitomim, ela min haziborit, right? You only collect from the worst, because we never disadvantage yitomim. So I don't get it, right? It must, if you're telling me that the ketubah is collected only from the orphans, if it's ziborit, that's not just true about ketubah, it's true about every debt. Okay. So you're right. Rav Nachman doesn't seem to make sense. We're going to get back to it. It's going to make sense. Elav mineh. So what are you saying? That you're collecting from him, meaning from the husband. So it's a case of divorce, right? Where he didn't didn't die, so it's not his. She's not a widow. She got divorced, right? So you're saying it must be from him, right? In which case the Mishnah. So it's not what Ravina said. It says, no, it can't be. Ella la'olam miyatmu. In fact, we're saying that the woman, according to Rav Nachman, right, Rav Marzutra and the greater of Nachman, sorry, the son of Rav Nachman, that Marzutra says that we're talking about a case where you're collecting the tuba of a wife, or a widow in this case, from the Yitomim. And the Mishnah has to tell me, that even though it's true by every debt that orphans pay, they pay from the worst quality, the same is true about their mother. Maybe it's not their mother, right? But the woman, the widow, who might be right, she doesn't have to be their mother, but the widow also collects from the worst. Why would I have thought that a widow would be different? Because you might have thought that because of chen, the word chen means niceness, kindness, not kindness. Chen is like desirable, right? We want her to be, how do they translate it?
Favor.
Favor, okay. That because of, we want the woman to have favor, we are makel with her, kamash malan, that's not the case. So what would you have thought? So there's a couple of different opinions. Rashi always, including here, says that china essentially means that we just said that women really want to get married more than men, right? They need it more. But the truth is that we want to make sure that a woman wants to get married. So we want to sweeten the deal for her in some ways. So you might have thought that since we want to sweeten the deal for her and encourage women to get married, that we say to her, oh, and if your husband dies, she's like, well, I'm going to be left bereft, right? This man is sick. Maybe she'll never marry him. That, you might have thought that we'll say to her, oh, you can collect from the better property. So you might have thought that we want to make it nicer for her. And therefore, says the Gemara, therefore, it's not true. That's a mistake. We don't. You might have thought that, but it's not the case. And she collects, like everybody other person, from an orphan, you collect the worst property. That's how Rashi understands China. Tosfos sort of understands it here and elsewhere. There's a long Tosfos, not a short Tosfos here, it's medium size, where Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, as he often does, and says it's because of we want other people to like her. We want her to be more valuable so that she can get remarried, right? Because unfortunately, for a woman who's widowed, there's more pressure or harder chance to get married, and so we want to give her more money. So you might think that if she has more property, she'll be more desirable on the market to get married, right? And so you might think that we want to give her more property, but Kamash one that we don't. So either way, we don't change the rules for a widow, but you might have thought that. Now I'm a Rav. Says Rava Tashma. Let us go back to our Mishnah and try to understand how to read our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, Rabbi Meir Omer, K'tubat Isha Bebenonit, right? Remember the Tanna Kama, which we said before is Rabbi Yehuda, says that a woman gets her Ketubah from the lowest value. Rabbi Meir says, no, she gets it from the middle value. K'tubat Isha Bebenonit. Now, Iman, who is she collecting her Ketubah from? If she's collecting it from the orphans because she's widowed, then why would Rabbi Meir say she gets the middle ground? Let's say Rabbi Meir Haditznan. Rabbi Meir doesn't hold of the Mishnah we just quoted of that you only collect from the worst. So it can't be a widow. It must be minay. It must be that she's collecting it from her husband because she's divorced. So then, if Rabbi Meir disagrees with Tanna Kama, it must be that the Tanna Kama who says that you get the worst. Even in that case, you get the worst. Even in that case, which disagrees with Marzutra and Ravina. Ben Ravina, right? Breder Ravina. Marzutra said that the Mishnah only, Marzutra Breder of Nachman, apologize. So this seems to disagree with Marzutra, who says that you only collect from the worst if it's a case of orphans. Says we're low. That's not how you read the Mishnah. Well, the fact is, Amar Rav, not low. Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Hachba Mayaskinan, Kingon Shenaseh Arev L'Niskei Beno. The case of our Mishnah is where the husband, the father of the husband became an arev, meaning he became a guarantor for anything that happens to his son. The Niskei Beno, the Balchov Beno, the K'tubat Beno, right? This kid unfortunately had very poor credit, right? And the father said, I will be a guarantor. If my son causes any damage, I'll pay it back eventually if he can. If my son borrows any money, I'll pay it back. If my son has a ketubah and gets married, I sign and say, I will guarantee it. Okay? Then, of course, the son died, right? And his wife wants to collect her ketubah. So in this case, it's not a regular case of yitomim, because you're not collecting the ketubah from the estate of the husband. You're collecting the ketubah from the father of the husband, who is very much alive. And therefore, in that case, Rabbi Meir says, you collect the middle of the road like any other debt. And the Tanna Kama says, but you don't collect the middle of the road, you collect the ketubah. And since a ketubah is ziborit, the father only has to pay the equivalent to ziborit. Okay? So our whole Mishnah is hai kedine, nizakin, ubalchov, cases of damage and loans, the michayim gavu, right? You collect them when a person's alive, right? So then, ihu nami ki magbi ki michayim magbi. When you collect from the father, who's the guarantor, you collect it as if the son was alive, even if he's not alive, right? Because you pay based on the current status, or not the current status, but what you would have done if he was alive. But k'tubat isha, the ketubah of a wife, which is usually or often collected when the husband dies, right? That's the case where there's widow. Ketubat isha de la'achar mita gavya, which you often or usually collected after the husband has died. Now, la'achar mita man gavya, who do you collect from when a man's died? You collect from his estate, miyatmi. So therefore, when the father said, I guarantee the ketubah, ihu nami ki magbi, when he collects, when she collects, basically, the woman collects from the father, when the magbi means pays, right? When you're being paid from the father, kilachar mita magbi, you pay as if the husband was dead, and you can pay from the worst property. That's the Tanna Kama. And Rebbe Meir says, I disagree in that case. In that case, since the person who's paying is the father who's very much alive, the father has to pay like any other debt and has to pay the middle of the road, the Beinonit. Okay, so that is the opinion of the beautiful explanation for how you understand our Mishnah. I'm going to do a few more lines. That makes sense? We have 2 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, so we are, again, it's the middle of a complicated sugya. It's going to continue tomorrow. We are 4 lines from the bottom. Let me just introduce a concept which everyone will become very familiar with tomorrow. So there's one concept called arev, which means a guarantor or co-signer on a loan, right? So someone wants to borrow money. I don't trust that person to pay me back. He gets a cosign from his parents, which I guess is a typical way to get cosigned, right? And so that's called an arev. There's another category called a kablan, which does not mean a contractor, which is what it means today, right? A kablan means a person who accepts on themselves primary responsibility to pay off a loan. So it's a higher level of acceptance of responsibility than an arev, right? An arev is a guarantor, a cosigner. A kablan basically is a primary responsibility to pay something back, okay? So says the Gemara now, 4 lines from the bottom, you have a complicated case in our Mishnah, right? Your complicated case in our Mishnah is that it's talking about where a person who before he died, or not before he died, when he got married, his father co-signed his ketubah. I wrote on the bottom of the ketubah, and if my son doesn't pay you back, I promise to pay you back. And then the son died, right? So the woman needs her ketubah. So the question is, do you look at the orphans or do you look at the father? Ask the Gemara, but don't we have a halacha that arev de ketubah lo mishtabeh? Because we're going to see in more detail tomorrow. There's a basic principle in Bava Batra that if you co-sign a loan for a ketubah, it means nothing. Why does it mean nothing? Because a ketubah is not a loan, right? If a person's lending someone else $1,000 and I co-sign it, I understand he wouldn't lend him the $1,000 unless I co-sign, right? But by ketubah, remember, the ketubah, no money changed hands, right? They had a wedding. And so the ketubah is, should the husband divorce her or die, she gets money, right? But there's nothing, so we will say in the Gemara in Bava Batra that a person who co-signs a ketubah, it doesn't really mean that they're going to pay it back. They think no one's losing anything, right? They want to get married. They're sitting under the chuppah. They're getting cold feet. I'm going to co-sign it to make this happen. But I never really think I'm going to have to pay that back. So that's the ruling. We'll see much more about it tomorrow. Typically, so therefore, says the Gemara, no, it's talking about a kablan. It's talking about where the father wasn't just a co-signer. He was this next level of responsibility, which is called a kablan. A kablan means that you can guarantee it even without conditions. Says the Gemara, okay, well, the Kablan, there's a big machloket, again, we'll have more of this tomorrow, which is whether a Kablan only has to pay back if there are property currently in the hands of the one who borrowed, which are nichse de lova. Hanichalamanda Amar Kablan pays back even afagav deletle nichse de lova mishtabe. Even if the lova doesn't have the money to pay it back at the time, then you are mishubat. Then it's fine. Father could be a Kablan. Elamanda Amar itle mishtabe letle lo mishtabe ma'ikla meimar. There's a opinion which again we'll go into more tomorrow, that a Kablan, even if I sign a document and saying I want to be a Kablan, I'm only accepting responsibility if at the time I sign it, the one who is accepting the money already has property to pay it back. Otherwise, I would never have made myself mishubat. I know he has money. I know that's going to be the first recourse. If it turns out that it gets ruined or he sells it, then I'll pay it back. So Michael Amemar, clearly this husband died and he had no money to pay back his loan, right? No, it's not true. You could say, you could say that in fact, the husband who died had a great field, but it got ruined. It got flooded. It got, diseased. And so at the time that the father signed the ketubah, his son had enough money to pay the ketubah. And so he went in full steam to accept responsibility. Later on, the field got ruined. The son died. The father now comes to pay the ketubah, and therefore he pays the best, or not the best, but the median. The other answer is that, a father and a son is a special relationship. Kol Gabi Bray, Shibud Mishabe Nafshe. That when, a general person who guarantees a loan doesn't mean it unless there's property there. But a father says, okay, I'll view my son as like me and I'll pay back. And so since he has property, he will allow his son to borrow the money. He accepts full responsibility, and therefore he has to pay it back. And the machloket in the Mishnah is, does he pay it back as if he was the son, right, who's had to pay it back with Beinonit, like every other debtor? Or does he pay it back like the son's heirs, like the orphans, who would pay the lowest quality? And that's the machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. But according to this opinion, if the husband was alive, meaning he divorced his wife, he always pays like every other debtor in the Torah, mi Beinonit, not from the worst, but from the middle of the road. Tomorrow, we're at the bottom line, you'll start getting into this complicated discussion about what a guarantor is and what a kablan is. What's an arev and what's a kablan?
Yeah, I was going to ask, under what circumstances is there a kablan that is assigned, or that actually comes forward and said, I'm going to guarantee this, and I'm going to be responsible fully?
So we'll discuss it more tomorrow, and really it's a big discussion about Bava Batra, of course, right? It's not a Gittin discussion, but it's what you write, basically. Meaning you have to say, so it's complicated. Well, again, we'll get into a little more tomorrow, but a kablan basically is a higher level of responsibility. So you call it.
But why would you actually put yourself in this situation? That's my question.
So again, I don't want to get into too much detail, but what Rashi explains here a little bit, but it's much more detail. We'll see tomorrow in Bava Batra. Is really a kablan is what happens is that you give money to the kablan at the time that you get the loan.
Okay.
So
all right.
So essentially, there's a transaction that happens, and whether it's a virtual transaction, a real transaction, right? Yeah. So essentially, the son wants to borrow $10,000 from the bank, okay? And the bank won't lend it to him, even though his property is a guarantor, because they're afraid he's going to lose his property. He has a diamond ring, let's say, it's worth $10,000. He gives that to the third party to hold, and the third party guarantees the loan. So in that case, essentially, you lent the money to the third party. Rashi says what happened here was the son gave the money to the father, and the father gave it back to him, right? Okay. Otherwise, you understand? Otherwise, why?
Yeah.
Which makes sense too. But so a kablan is a much more intense level of responsibility because either of a kinyan or money that goes into that. Again, we'll do more of it tomorrow, and a lot more of it when we get to Nizikin.
Okay.
That.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a great day. Happy 4th of July. Hard daf, but stuck through it.
Good day. Thanks.
Thank you all. Have a good day, everyone.
Good. Take care.
You too.